Hey there everyone, this is Samuel Johnson and welcome back to the Steven Universe Retrospectives, and today we're going to be discussing episodes 71 and 72 of Steven Universe, When It Rains and Back to the Barn. Now when we last left our valiant heroes, the Crystal Gems, they managed to finally capture Peridot. They cornered her on the Galaxy War, got into a bit of a fight with her, and ultimately it ended with her being poofed and bubbled and sent back to the temple. Also revealing that her arms and legs were actually these enhancements called limb enhancers that the gems promptly dumped into the ocean. However, before she was pooped, she tried pleading with the gems, claiming that they needed her because she knows something about something. Stephen was curious about it, and while the gems were ready to write it off as just the desperate pleadings of a gem who realizes they've been beaten, Stephen wanted to know more, and so he snuck into the temple and managed to unbubble Peridot, allowing her to reform, revealing that she was in fact a short little gremlin. While Peridot revealed to Stephen that the thing she was trying to warn the gems about was something called the cluster, she ran away before she could actually clarify on details, resulting in her running into the other gems and being cornered in Steven's bathroom. When Steven gives them the information about the cluster and that Peridot seems to know about it and it's making her afraid, the gems realize that if they need to know more about the cluster, then they're sadly going to have to let Peridot be free because she's the only one that knows anything about it, but unfortunately, even if they do let her out, she's not very much willing to talk to them. So, unfortunately, both sides are at a stalemate, as the gems are trying to get Peridot to open up to them, and Peridot wants them to piss off, which is where this episode opens up, as Peridot is still sequestered into the bathroom, and the gems are doing everything in their power to try and negotiate with her and get her to cooperate. Unfortunately, though, like I said, things are not going well. The only one of the gems that Peridot's willing to talk to is Steven, as she's letting him in and out of the bathroom, but even then, she's still not revealing any new information. As such, the gems decide to essentially just write this off and do their own investigating. And so they decide to leave and leave Steven in charge of guarding Peridot, telling him to not let her out of his sight, which Steven obliges, but ultimately things kind of get hectic as while Steven is watching Peridot, a storm comes over Beach City, and well, with storms come lightning, and so as there are lightning bolts with bouts of thunder going on, Peridot seems to drown out of the bathroom and freak out, thinking that this is the cluster, it's the end of the world, they're all gonna die, and all that, and yada yada yada. But Steven tells her, no, that's not what it is. That's not what this is. This is just thunder. That's what happens when it storms. Peridot is kind of clueless about what a storm is, so Steven explains the whole cycle of rain, how water gets super hot, turns to steam, when it gets heavy, it comes raining back down. As such, Peridot is still clueless about it, and so Steven decides to give her a demonstration of what rain is by just running out and playing around in the rain. And when Peridot sees this, she's actually in awe, because, well, apparently she's never seen rain before. And when she goes outside and touches it, she's amazed, intrigued, actually. And when she sees Steven having fun, she's just like, this is intriguing. As such, after she and Steven have had a little play, presumably off screen, Peridot seems to be contemplating something, and so after pacing back and forth a little bit, she finally decides she wants to tell Steven something. She's ready to tell him about the cluster. However, she does not want to share the information with the gems. She will only share it with Steven. And on top of that, while she doesn't have access to her limb enhancers, which have all access to her logs and so forth, there are backup logs in the kindergarten. So she wants to take Steven there so she can show him the information that he needs. And while Steven ultimately does agree to her terms, but he states that if they're going to go there, then they need to hold hands the whole time so he can keep an eye on her, which Peridot's a little annoyed at, but she concedes to his demands, and so they both go to the kindergarten, which does result in a little bit of small talk between the pair, as Peridot wants to know what Steven is, because she's come to realize that he is a gem, but she just assumes that he's like some battle gem called a quartz that emerged and so forth, and blah 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 blah, and blah 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 blah. But eventually they do manage to get into that little square hole that goes down the bottom, and it's on the way there, Peridot begins explaining what the cluster is. And essentially, well, and more specifically, Steven begins asking her about the gem mutants, the ones that are made from when a bunch of gem shards are fused together. Apparently, Peridot was part of the reason why Peridot was in the kindergarten was because she was there to check on their progress, and the reason she was looking at their progress was because apparently These experiments were utilized after the Earth was considered a bust, when the Gem Empire came here and decided Earth wasn't worth it, and they decided to use it for something else. Which is where the cluster comes in, as when Peridot brings Steven back to that little control room and they manage to get it up and running, Peridot reveals that all those gem mutants, all those amalgams and whatever, those were prototypes for the cluster. The real cluster is a lot bigger. Essentially, the cluster is actually a giant amalgam of gem shards, which is located in the center of the Earth. And put simply, it's been lying dormant there for thousands of years. And basically, for now, it's just doing nothing. It's just essentially like a gem in its bubble. But sooner or later, the cluster will emerge. And the thing is, when we've seen what happens when a gem forms, and whenever they form, like, their gem is usually like a little part of their body somewhere. Like Pearl's is on her like Pearl and Peridot have their gems on their foreheads, Garnet has them on her hands, Amethyst her chest, and Lapis on her back. But in the case of the cluster, here's the thing. Imagine the Earth is like a basketball with the cluster like smack dab in the middle. And put simply, when the cluster finally emerges and gains form, that basketball is going to break. And that is why Peridot is afraid, because part of her mission was to come to Earth to check on the status of this thing and see how far along it was, and well, it's close to waking up. That's why Peridot is freaking out, because if this thing wakes up, the Earth will be destroyed. Think of it like this. Have you ever seen the movie Eternals? Remember how in that movie there was a celestial egg in the center of the Earth, and when it emerged, and when the actual celestial was born, it would destroy the Earth? It's like that. Only it's not a bunch of, only the team is actually a bunch of lesbian space rocks, and Kumail Nanjiani isn't there as a character that I like, but also kind of want to go away. But anyway, the point is, this thing is now in the center of the Earth. The point is, sooner or later, this thing's going to wake up, and when it does, Earth's going to be destroyed. And when Steven realizes this, he's kind of wondering, what the hell are they going to do? Peridot, she thinks that they can do it, that she and Steven can do it on their own. After all, Steven knows how clouds work. If he has other knowledge about Earth, they can more than easily take this thing out by themselves, right? Well, Steven tells her no, not really. Even the stuff, like, even going back to his knowledge about rain, the only reason he knows about that is because when he was a kid, he freaked out about that, and his dad explained how rain worked. And so he says that if they want to combat the cluster, they're probably going to need to give this information to the gems. But Peridot is still not willing to engage, thinking that they can just go right back to the temple and go right back to the bathroom, and they can still think of a plan. As such, Steven is still not... As such, she's just kind of ignoring Steven's queries, but ultimately their conversation is ground to a halt as more gem mutants show up on the scene and attack them. Steven manages to bubble himself and Peridot and manage to run them away, but unfortunately his efforts really just back them into a corner, figuratively and literally, as the gem mutants ends up trying to pound on Steven's bubble to try and break through. Thankfully, the rest of the crystal gems show up and take care of the gem mutants. And as they're doing that, Steven does tell Peridot they can't do this on their own. If they want to stop the cluster, they're gonna need the crystal gems. As such, Steven takes the bubble down, and the gems immediately want to know what the hell Steven is doing there. And so once they see Peridot, they think that maybe Steven, and so they start getting a little upset with Steven. But Peridot immediately jumps to Steven's defense and says no. He did exactly what he was told. And so, begrudgingly, she finally goes up to the gems and decides to let them in on what the cluster is. Which is where Back to the Barn kicks in, as Peridot finally does explain how the cluster operates. Giant artificial fusion, center of the Earth, when it emerges, boom. As such, once the gems realize this, they realize that if the Earth is to live, they need to take down the cluster. They need to find a way to get to it in the center of the Earth and destroy it. As such, immediately Peridot and Pearl immediately think of the drill, or at least Pearl does too. Pearl thinks of the idea first, and Peridot cuts her off and co-opts the idea as her own. And essentially, they realize that they need to find a way to make it out of whatever spare parts they can. And while Peridot's first plan is to just take apart anything mechanical in Steven's house, Steven thinks he's got the perfect place where they can find spare parts to build a giant, to build a new device to drill into the earth. And that device is, well, and that place is the barn. Yep, back to the universe, back to Greg's barn, the one with all the junk in it that Steven, Pearl, and Greg used to build a rocket before. As such, Peridot, Steven, and Pearl go to the barn, and they immediately start getting to work setting up a plan to try and build a drill. However, after Pearl immediately outlines the plan and what they're going to do, Peridot just tells her, okay, that's good enough, you can go now. And Pearl's just naturally confused about this. However, Peridot is equally as confused as to why Pearl isn't just leaving, even offering other commands like that'll be all, it's not really working. As such, Peridot wants to know why the Pearl isn't listening, and so Steven thinks, well, no, she's here to help build the drill, and Steven's like, well, why? She's just a Pearl. At which point, Pearl starts getting a little agitated, and when Steven asks what the heck that has to do with anything, excuse me one second. Anyway, like I said, Steven begins questioning Peridot about why Pearl can't work on it, and Peridot soon reveals an actual interesting bit of lore and detail about the gem homeworld. Apparently, gems come in different varieties. And I don't mean that in the sense of like they're operating different ranks. No. Put simply, they come in bulk. On the gem homeworld, gems of different types are essentially, no one gem is unique. There are various different types of gems all across homeworld, and all of them are essentially one type of gem. Let me put it this way. Going back to Ruby and Sapphire, while we only know of the one Ruby and the one Sapphire, on Homeworld there are probably dozens of other versions of them. Dozens of rubies, maybe dozens of sapphires. There could probably be different amethysts, different jaspers, and yes, even different peridots. Pretty much every gem on Homeworld has a specific purpose, and they make specific gems for that. And a lot of them are all pretty much the same. They're all cut from the same cloth, and they all exist to serve a singular purpose. They're pretty much just all the same. If you look, there might be some variances in their demeanors in certain areas, but essentially one type of gem is created to do one type of thing, which is where Pearl comes in. As on Homeworld, pearls like the one we know are made to order servants. They exist exclusively to be your property. Essentially, just do what you want. They're just glorified maids who exist to carry your stuff, sing for you on command, just do all these various odds and ends for you. Not because they want to, but because that's what they exist for. And that's why Peridot is talking down to Pearl like this, because she thinks that Pearl is just a made-to-order servant who exists only to serve her. And Pearl, well, she takes offense to that because, well, she fought long and hard for Earth's independence, and when Peridot even asks her, who do you belong to, Pearl tells her that she belongs to no one, that she is her own gem. Peridot still just kind of brushes off and says, well, for now you can belong to me, and you can just work for me, but Pearl is not willing to listen. She believes that she has every right to work on this project and be the lead, just as much as Peridot does. Well, Peridot just thinks that she should listen to her because she knows more about this, and Pearl is just a Pearl. As such, they get into an argument over this, and Steven believes that they can try and settle this, but both sides are still very hostile and saying that essentially things get to a head when Steven thinks that maybe the only way they can end this is if they have a competition. What's the competition about? Building robots. Excuse me one second. Sorry about that. Anyway, they're going to build robots. Which I kind of love how Steven suggested as they're in the middle of the argument, and then when they say there must be some way we can settle this, and Steven's eyes just light up and he says, robots. You should build robots. And I do love that. As such, Pearl and Peridot immediately agree to this, and both just within seconds just use the available materials of the barn to create their own robots to pilot. Pearl's being more slender and slim and eloquent, while Peridot's is bulky, strong, and made for battle. Anyway, because of this, to try and determine who's more suited to be the leader of this project, Pearl and Peridot begin doing a series of competitions that Steven, Garnet, and Amethyst are essentially the, I want to say, judges for. Steven mostly is the one that awards points on that, but Garnet and Amethyst are watching too and yelling support to Pearl the whole time. But pretty much all of them are just doing their own thing. And excuse me one second. Sorry about that. Anyway, yeah, like I said, Peridot and Pearl essentially take the robots and go through a series of exercises and obstacle courses. Essentially, they're just like I said, they're in a competition. And as they continue going through tasks, they're each awarded points on how well they've done in either task. But eventually, they both end up with a tie, which Peridot isn't exactly happy with. Pearl is just ready to let sleeping dogs lie and say we're the same. Let's move on. But Peridot thinks they need a tiebreaker, and that tiebreaker ends up being giant robot fight, which I love. There's one line I love that Steven yells out, "Stop! Giant robots shouldn't fight!" And I respond, and Pearl and Amethyst is just going, "Fight, fight, fight!" Which is just funny. So yeah, Peridot and Pearl get into a physical tussle between their robots, and unfortunately, Peridot is starting to get the upper hand as she manages to hold Pearl down and starts ripping her robot apart. However, she's still continuing to degrade her and insult her, saying, "You can't beat me, you're just a Pearl." And Pearl's response is, "That's right, I am a Pearl." At which point she then punches Peridot square in the face, resulting in Peridot getting a bit of a shiner. As such, Pearl managed to get her robot free from Peridot, and she says, "Yes, I may just be a Pearl, but I'm still going to kick your butt." At which point she jumps into the air, gets ready to do a leaping kick right into Peridot's face. And then Peridot grabs her out of midair and then starts throwing her around like a rag doll, like the Hulk that did to Loki in the Avengers. Huh, 2 MCU references in one video. Point is, Peridot is the victor in this, and she thinks that, yes, I'm the leader, I'm the one in charge, I'm superior, blah, 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 blah. But the gems are still going over to Pearl and still praising her for all the effort she put in, which they think is awesome. She's got some... I think it's awesome, and they got she has good moves, and yada yada yada, just pretty much building up her self-confidence. Peridot, of course, still thinks this is nuts, because why are they praising her? She lost, and she's just a common Pearl. And Steven's response is, if Pearls are anything like you described them, Pearl is anything but common. She taught herself how to fight. She's super intelligent, is a great technician, and she does everything in her power every day to be better than she already is. That's amazing. That's not common at all. And in response to the, well, why is she being praised? I'm the one that won. What about the rules? Garnet's response is, just welcome to Earth. I love it. As such, by the end, Peridot kind of sees how everything's going, and by the end, she acknowledges that Pearl probably is actually skilled in more things than she actually gave her credit for. And so by the end, she's willing to let Pearl offer some advice and give her some pointers on how they should proceed. So all's well that ends well, and it looks like they're on their way to being the cluster, which, yeah, spoiler warning, it's going to be a few episodes. It's going to be a few episodes while they're dealing with that. So yeah, they're going to be at this barn for a while. So okay, my thoughts on these episodes. Honestly, with the way they're arranged, I'm okay talking about them as if they're one flowing story. But considering the contents of both episodes, I think I could also talk about them individually. Now, for the overarching story, what I do like is that this is once again progressing Peridot's character and continuing on with her redemption arc that was established back in the Catch and Release episode. As in these episodes, we're seeing Peridot slowly but surely beginning to open up to the crystal gems. It's a reluctant opening up, but it is happening. And it all starts with Steven. What I kind of like in these two episodes is that from the outset, she does not want to cooperate with the gems. She sees them as the enemy, the brutes who sabotaged her mission and trapped her on this garbage heap of a planet that is about to be destroyed by a giant gem geoweapon. And as a result of that, she just does not want to listen to them, period. However, there is one among them that she is okay with listening to, and that is Steven. And that is because Steven actually does not treat her like the enemy. He actually talks to her. He listens to her. He actually gives her respect, and as a result of this, Peridot, whether she knows it or not, begins respecting him. She actually begins seeing him as someone that she can actually talk to. She actually does give him a little bit of leeway. And as the episodes go along, when he begins giving her information that she was thus far lacking up to that point, i.e., how rain works, she begins respecting him more. She begins seeing him as a friend. Whether she knows it or not, she begins starting to trust him. Not just because he has valuable information for her, but because he's willing to talk to her. He's not yelling at her like the gems are. He's not trying to barter with her. He's just talking. And from these little conversations they have, from him reassuring her that no, it's fine. See, the rain isn't dangerous. To them just talking and them having when they do when they do start bartering on things, it's nothing too big. It's literally just you gotta hold my hand while we're doing this thing. And essentially, it's just that. Essentially, she starts respecting him because he treats her with respect. And through that mutual respect, she begins opening up to him. He explains to her how rain works, and she did not know how rain worked before. Again, hold on one second. This puppy's... Sorry about that. Hopefully that's the last one. Anyway, like I was saying, PERIDOT begins opening up and trusting Steven because he does treat her with respect. He tells her information about something she doesn't understand, and from this, she becomes more willing to talk to him. He doesn't give her the information he doesn't give her the information as a bartering chip. He doesn't tell her how rain works because, okay, I told you this, you tell me that. No, she sees it as a kindness. She realizes, you're treating me with kindness. You explain this thing I didn't understand, so just kind of return the favor. I'll explain this to you. Sorry again. Okay, hopefully that was the final interruption. Anyway, like I said, because Steven treats PERIDOT with respect and explains something that he didn't need to, she begins opening up to him and is willing to share information with him. Whereas the gems were still treating her like the enemy and that they needed to barter to get this information, Steven actually did treat her like a friend, she was another person that he could just have a conversation with. It's why she was willing to let him into the bathroom and still talk with him when the other gems were trying to think of strategies to get PERIDOT to open up. It's why she let him go into the bathroom to still do his business while she was actively negotiating with the crystal gems. It's one of and ultimately, it's because she trusts Steven that she is finally willing to trust the gems. Like, okay, I take that back. It's not, she doesn't trust the gems. She's willing to cooperate with them because Steven vouches for them. And he ultimately does reveal that, yes, despite his abilities and despite that friendship, he's not as capable as she thinks he is. And as a result of this, she's willing to listen to him when he says, we need the gems. She doesn't want to do it, but because Steven vouched for them, she is willing to cooperate. And I like that. I like that the reason why she is willing to listen to the gems at all, or even be in the same room as them without trying to hurt them, is because Steven is the one that suggests it. Again, she does try brushing it off at every opportunity because she does not want anything to do with the gems. Again, like I said, she sees them as the enemy. But because Steven, this person who despite being on the opposite side, treats her with respect and has actually tried to engage in her in a way that's not hostile, she actually starts opening up more. And that's one of the things that I like. And on top of that, one of the things that also helps is that it also opens up more of her character. We've seen PERIDOT in the past be very, as the enemy, she's been anal, she's been angry, she's been a bit of a gremlin in her own regard, and those character traits have also carried over to her now. But now that we see her in kind of a pseudo ally role, we see her when she's more vulnerable, when she is scared. And one of the things that I like here is that while she genuinely likes to believe that she's the smartest gem in the room, when she encounters something she doesn't understand, she's curious. She doesn't understand. She of course acts with fear, which makes sense. When you encounter something you don't know, obviously you're going to be a little afraid of it. But the more she learns, the more fascinated she is, which is another reason why she trusted Steve, was why she started opening up to Steven. Because Steven explained something to her she genuinely did not understand, rain. And so when he explained it to her and she realized it was not something to be feared, she was fascinated by it. And that's one of the things that I think works well with PERIDOT. She trades in knowledge, not for negotiation's sake, but for knowledge's sake. She didn't understand rain, now she does. And Steven was the one that gave her that information, and so she starts respecting his abilities more because of it. And that's consistent with PERIDOT even in these episodes. In the Going to the Back to the Barn episode, she initially saw Pearl as just a worker, as just someone who was there because, well, she was the servant. She was just there to do Steven's bidding and then go off when she wasn't needed. But then when Pearl actually showcased her technical prowess to Peridot, it impressed her. It made her start to think, maybe this person is more than I gave them credit for. She doesn't want to admit it at first because, well, she's arrogant, and again, in the gem caste system, pearls are at the bottom. But when Pearl actually does put her best foot forward, and she sees that other gems respect her for her abilities, Peridot starts to realize, okay, maybe I can give you some leeway here. And I like that. I do like that they actually showcase that. Peridot, in this case, barters in knowledge. Knowledge is what makes her up, and when she encounters something she doesn't understand, well, the more she learns about it, the more she begins to respect it. And that's showcased in these episodes rather perfectly. And it's what ultimately helps her grow closer to Steven and the gems. Yes, Steven is the link that gets Peridot even talking to the gems on a civil matter, but once she starts engaging with them, she starts finding common ground in ways that she never thought she would find before, which I like. I like seeing that with her character arc. I like seeing that progression, and it gives us and not only showcases the progression of their relationship, but also gives us more of a window into Peridot as a person, not just as the enemy, but as a character. And I like that. I like that. It really does help further along the story and gets you into the story and helps you get into the characters and their dilemmas, as well as making you want to see more Peridot, because honestly, the more time you see her as an ally, the more you start to kind of like her, because she really is a very mischievous tyke when it comes to stuff like this. She really, like I said, she's full of herself, but she's also willing to listen when she's also willing to listen when she realizes she's wrong. So I like that. I like that progression. And on top of that, we do see some more. What I like again is the subtle hints at the lore for the show. Well, okay, not subtle hints. In this case, the outright lore reveal that gems come in, like I said, groupings. Now, okay, they're not like mass produced one by one. Okay, they are, but as we see with the kindergarten. But I do like that we do see that gems are made from specific purposes. That on Homeworld there are probably hundreds of other amethysts, hundreds of other rubies and pearls, all designed for a specific purpose. It gives us a window into how the gem hierarchy operates, while also kind of giving hints as to why the crystal gems probably wanted to get away from that in the first place. So I do once again like that, and it's reflected with Peridot, as she's from that system, having to essentially unlearn that and get used to a different system. Because again, going back to when she won the competition, the other gems were still praising Pearl, despite the fact that Peridot won in the end. So she has to kind of understand that, and the more she finally realizes, oh, they like you because you can do all these things, I should probably give you some credit too. I like it again showcases more of what Peridot's coming from and what the society and what the gem society is like. Again, I dig it. I really think it works. On top of that, but again, as individual episodes, I think both are good. I kind of already went over what I thought worked in When It Rains when I talk about Peridot's arc, because that episode mostly focused on that. Throughout the episode, we see Peridot willing to open up more and more to Steven as he treats her like a person, to actually explain things to her that she doesn't understand, and the more she learns, the more she starts respecting Steven, to the point where she is willing to trust him and gives him information on the cluster, which this episode finally gives us information on the cluster. And yeah, what I do like is how big of an escalation this is, because we finally learn what Peridot was trying to do on Earth the whole time. Why she sent the Red Eye, why she sent the Robonoids, why she had to come to Earth at all. She realized because this thing needed to be checked on, and yes, I kind of like that it's been there the whole time, and now the gems learn about it, they realize it needs to be taken care of. And I really do like that. And the fact that, and because of its existence, the Peridot and the crystal gems have to work together. As after all, Peridot is still stuck on Earth, she has no way of getting off, and the gems care about the Earth. So if both sides want to survive, they need to work together on this. I like that. I like seeing how that progresses, and again, I like how Peridot does grow in the When It Rains episode. And as for the Back to the Barn episode, like I said, it furthers along Peridot's character as she ends up clashing with Pearl and has some of her preconceptions shattered. But in the case of Pearl, this also operates as a good character piece, as we see her being more willing to stand up for herself and defend herself, and in the past, where instead of being browbeaten down by other people who are stronger than her, while also giving us some nice funny antics with seeing Peridot and Pearl clashing with the robots. Because I'm not gonna lie, I loved the whole competition with the robots, and I loved the way Steven's eyes lit up when he suggested it. Because let's be honest, giant robots are fucking awesome, and if you say they're not, I'm sorry, but I disagree with you. And I love just the way Steven starts hyping it up. Like the instant that the robots are thrown on the table, he just forgets about the drill. And when Garnet and Amethyst show, they're like, "Hey, are they making the drill?" It's like, "No, we're making robots now." It's like, no explanation. We just making robots now, and just roll with it. And by the end, although by the end we see Steven's pacifist nature coming through, as when Pearl and Peridot actually end up duking it out. He says, "No, giant robots shouldn't fight," whereas I and Amethyst are like, "Dude, shut up and enjoy the awesome." It's honestly really nice. And again, it's nice to see Pearl. There are too many gems with P's in their names. It's nice to see Pearl actually standing up for herself against what is honestly a superior foe in the case of Peridot's robot, and it really works well to help showcase how her character has come along thus far. To show that that she is more proud of her abilities and is more willing to stand up for herself. She's more willing to call someone else out on their crap, as in the case with Peridot. And by the end, it really does feel like a progression has been made in that regard. Not just with Pearl, but also with Peridot having to unlearn all this stuff. Again, and it also, on top of that, it also gets the ball rolling for the cluster arc, as I'm going to call it. As like I said, for the next 2 episodes, the gems and all the gems are going to be at the barn as they continue progressing with building the drill to get to the cluster. And so for the next 2 episodes, we see the crystal gems and Peridot have to just slowly get used to one another and ultimately come to understanding. I like that. It's really good, and both episodes do well in setting that up and showcasing the arcs the characters are going to go through by the end. So overall, yeah, I like both episodes. When It Rains does a good job at setting things further in motion with Peridot, as you see her opening up a little bit more to the gems, albeit reluctantly, while Back to the Barn does a good job at having Peridot get used to them and start to have her preconceptions challenged and start to change. I like that. I think it works. So overall, yeah, both are good episodes. I enjoyed them, and I look forward to seeing this continue. So, yeah, that's about it. Thank you for watching. I'm Samuel Johnson. I apologize for the various puppy-themed interruptions, and tune in next week where we end season 2 not with a bang but with a whimper, and we celebrate my birthday. I'm kidding. Next week's my birthday, so hope you're there for that, and yeah, hope you have a good night and take care. Sweet dreams.